Hello, Switzerland, and welcome to DevSecOn Switzerland. We are a chapter of the global DevSecOn community, an inclusive community that educates and enables developers about application security. Coming up in this session, we're going to have Avishai Zvoznik, who's the security research manager at Cato, with his session on Say What You Should Know About Living Off the Cloud Attacks, which is an interesting session. So without further ado, we'll start with that in a second. My name is Diron Tal. I'm here from Sneak doing developer advocacy. So happy to host this session. Happy to have Avishai talk to us about cloud attacks and what that actually entails. I'm not usually the host of these events, but unfortunately we had our awesome chapter leader for DevSecOn Switzerland had to step down. So if you wanted to host those sessions and be more involved in the community, feel free to reach out to us on the devsecon.com website, the Discord, or just that email at info@devsecon.com. We'll love to have you on board. So any feedback is really appreciated, both on the chat. If you have questions for Avishai, he'd be loving to take those questions and answer them on the go. Also, if you're on the Discord server, awesome as well. Nice to see you there. Please ask us questions there. We'll be monitoring that as well. It's actually really a great opportunity to also connect with the rest of the community and peers about DevSecOps and all of that application and cloud security aspects. So please join. You can find the Discord server address on devsecon.com, and I'll put the banner on in a bit as well. After this session, once this is recorded, you can find it both on the website with a link to this session, as well as on the devsecon.com website as well, plus all the other sessions from the chapter and different chapters around the world. So please, go there and find new and interesting content you want to learn about. DevSecOn is brought to you by Sneak. Our aim is to create a vendor-neutral space to share the knowledge and best practices related to software security. So without further ado, let's have Avishai and get going with the session. Hey, Avishai, how are you doing?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
Cool. All good. I'm actually very excited for this cloud attacks. Doing a bit of security stuff myself. So I'm like super interested in learning what you found out and what you're going to teach all of us here.
Glad to hear. Thank you.
Cool. So let me add you and your slides and get myself out of the way.
Okay, I see they are live now. So hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm happy to present this topic today. It all started, black screen, somewhat black. A couple of months ago, when I saw that Mandiant article about an APT, an advanced persistent threat, which means some, let's say, high-profile cyber attack, where the attackers used Trello-based command and control server. I might have been saying a couple of words that you're not familiar with by now, but you are going to be. And then I tried replicating it myself to see how it works. And this is how this presentation came up. But I had some moments of self-criticism saying, hey, this is actually some kind of an attack that's been out for years now. But then just a couple of months ago, I find this article. It was April 17th this year, where hackers abuse Google Command and Control Red Team tool in attacks. This means that the Google infrastructure, or let's say the Google environment, was used as a command and control server. And they used even an open source GitHub-based command and control server. You can look it up on the internet, GC2, that was out for 2 years. And I think that all of this comes together to tell us that the issues of having cloud-based command and control servers are still on. They still persist. And I think that I see organizations running short on knowledge and understanding of this type of attacks. And this is why we're here today. And this calms down my self-criticism as well, which is perfect. So let's see what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about command and control servers, the traditional way, the old school way, And then we're going to follow their evolution in terms of the attackers finding different ways of having the malware communicate with the server side. So we're going to talk about LOC, which stands for Living Off the Cloud attacks. These cloud-based command and control servers. We're going to see a couple of examples. Some of them are going to be in charts and animations, and some of them are going to be in live demos. And then we'll cover some takeaways and some mitigation suggestions for how to deal with this kind of attacks. But first, a little bit about myself. So this was me when I was probably less than half my current age, back when there was no cloud, I think, at all. All the black screens that I knew by then were not terminal, but Winamp. Yeah, sorry. But now for the past, I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 10 years now, both offensive and defensive. And now for the past 3 years, I've been managing a security research group in Cato Networks. This is how I got here today. So let's start with a very simplistic approach that was first used, the traditional approach to command and control servers. But first, what are command and control servers? When an attacker infects some sort of a malware, they want to have a server in between that sends the let's say relays the bidirectional communication between them, right? So there's the attacker on the right side and the malware on the left side, and the attacker wants to send commands to the infected device, or probably the infected devices, as there might be many of them. So they send them a request to execute a command. It's going to be through that server, and this server is something that the attacker either acquires themselves, or they can be either physical or virtual, but it's completely owned by the attacker. It's their own server. And then after executing the command, the result also goes back. Sometimes we may interchangeably call it result or telemetry, which goes back from the malware. So one example for this would be execute a command, something like please infect the device near you, and then the result would be, okay, this was completed successfully, or any other type of logs or telemetries. And obviously there's many other different types of commands. Let's say, please start crypto mining and transfer the cryptocurrency to my wallet, or encrypt the entire hard disk and send a ransom note, or any other thing that the attacker wants to do. So this is how it was traditionally. This is a little bit oversimplified. Let's consider another factor here. And sometimes there has to be a storage server that is also owned by the attacker. They have to set it up and maintain it in the traditional form. So, for example, if they want to exfiltrate information, such as a sensitive file from the infected device, then the exfiltrated information will go through the storage server, and the attacker can collect the result. But still, these two servers are completely owned by the attacker. Now, this was the way that it was handled historically. And the way that security vendors had, or security IT, to mitigate the risk here is that if they knew what the IP or the domain names of the attacker's servers are, then they could set a firewall rule that denies it. Okay, so let's say that there's 1337 for the command and control server, 1338 for the storage server. protectors could set a firewall rule that denies this. How would they know to set this firewall rule? That it would probably be by threat intelligence or by subscribing to different security feeds. And this would obviously keep the malware from communicating with the command and control server, which makes the attacker on the right side sad. So the attackers remained alone under the snow, scratching their heads and looking for alternatives to communicate with the command and control servers. The next evolution of this kind of communication with the servers was to try and make the domain names or the IPs of the command and control servers more dynamic. And one way of doing it, which I'm going to explain a bit simplistically, but I'm trying to make a point here, is by DGA. DGA means domain generation algorithms. In this case, there's not a single domain for the command and control server, but the malware is installed with an algorithm that calculates different generated domains and every time communicates with a different domain. This means that it makes it harder to track down by just a static feed that knows about that domain. So let's see it here. The algorithm is on the malware side, and then they know which server to communicate with. It doesn't necessarily have to be 3 or more different command and control servers with random generated domain names, but it can be one that is subscribed to these different domains or changes them from time to time. And in this case, when the malware can communicate with each of the servers so that it evades any kind of static protection. So, but still, if the malware is behind the firewall on the organization that only allows communication with known destinations, then there'll be no communication between the malware and the command and control server, which kills the entire attack operation. This is why the attacker, again, on the right-hand side, is sad. So once again, the attacker remains alone in the snow, scratching their head and looking for alternatives to communication between the malware and the command and control servers. There is snow and there's clouds, and they look up at the cloud and see that the cloud era is coming. Yeah. So people talk about the cloud. This is all over, except for one man who doesn't like that cloud idea so much, which is Richard Stallman, founder of GNU, and says that it's complete gibberish and that and waits for this idiocy to stop. He is the old man yelling at the cloud. If we're quoting Simpson meme, this was found on the internet. But except for him, there's many different organizations who in the past years started adopting the cloud. This means that their infrastructure is on the cloud when they want to have storage is on the cloud, and what else? Code on the cloud, managing the people that in your organization on the cloud, even sometimes Active Directory and things that you wouldn't think like 20 years ago that are going to be outside of the company, they are actually outside of the company. And this is great. This is nice. It's nice to see all the charts going up. But what's more important here is that this means that organizations start trusting the cloud. And when I say trusting, it means that if they had those old firewall rules that only allow trusted destinations, now they have no choice but also to allow the known cloud destinations, right? Um, and this is something that can be interesting for attackers. Attackers looking at the clouds under the snow started recalling the good old living off the land attacks, which is not living off the cloud yet. Um, Living off the land attacks is a technique where the attacker doesn't send executable software straight to the target, but rather uses the existing software that's already on the target, on the infected device, for executing commands. So, for example, they can use PowerShell, which is very powerful, CMD, WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, all these command line tools to run different commands on infected devices without having to ask these devices to download additional software, which may be blocked by different anti-malware services or any other sort of security mechanisms. So this is good for the attackers because then it's less hassle of transferring files and remembering to clear them after they go. But also, it's much better for the attackers because they go. It's less likely that they'll go detected. So the attackers took the same concept of utilizing existing technology for stealth and added cloud services to it, because now, as we said, everyone trusts the cloud, and this is how they came up with living off the cloud attacks. The difference between living off the land and living off the cloud attacks is that while living off the land is based on the communication, on what happens on the malware infected device itself, here in living off the cloud attacks, we're talking more about the communication with the server. So let's see one example for it, which is halfway good. This is taken back from 2009. And what you see here is Twitter, back in the days before it became X, and before the Twitter API has become a luxury product that's only for high society. And then the attacker would have a Twitter account and post tweets with these random generated strings that the malware can then interpret and translate into domain names with a well-defined algorithm. This means that whenever the attacker would want to change the domain with which the malware communicate, they can just post another tweet which tells the malware, "Hi, I'm now on a different server, so please communicate with that server." And this gives them basically endless control of which server the malware is going to communicate with. And by this, they can evade any mechanism that's based on static IP feeds. There are more examples for this, a bit more recent. This one is with YouTube. So the same can be done. This one's from 2019, and the same can be done with YouTube descriptions or YouTube comments. So here you see another example where the random number is actually a coded domain name with which the malware can communicate. So all the malware has to do is communicate via API with either Twitter or YouTube, translate the random string into by using the well-defined algorithm, and then communicate with that server. Let's see it here. So there's that Twitter profile owned by the attacker with random strings. Malware goes there via API, collects the latest domain, which is this one, and then translates it. It translates into this domain, and then the malware is ready to serve the attacker through the selected domain. Okay, I said that this is halfway good because here we have exactly the same problem that we had before, right? We talked about firewalls or security services that operate on an allow list fashion. And this means that if only known destinations are allowed, then the communication, though the communication with the Twitter would succeed, the communication with the random server would fail. And then again, we have a sad attacker. So once again, they have to scratch their head and find ways to improve this and to evade security systems. So what attackers did was to stop and start stripping down all their malware operation into what the bare necessities of CNC are. CNC is command and control, of course. So first, they need a bidirectional channel for commands that are sent from the server side to the client side, and telemetries that are sent from the malware device, a malware infected device, to the server. They also need a place for exfiltration, for storing exfiltrated information. And they also need what I call a database for CRM in the sense of customer relationship management. In many large-scale campaigns, attackers have not only one infected device, as we said, but many of them. And they want to be able to either send them all commands together or send them separately to understand what happens and to debug issues in each of the infected devices. They want to have some kind of support for multiple pieces of malware installed in many different places. Thinking about this, we can see that all of these functionalities are available in most of the cloud services that we know. And it's not just an idea that I had, as said before, but it really happened. So we started noticing that in the past years, attackers are using command and control systems or for either part of the malware operation. So as you see in the top left, attackers using storage services that are cloud-based. So we don't really know where the command and control server is in this case, but we know that all the storage is in a cloud service. And sometimes it's also possible to have the entire thing purely on the cloud. We also see the adoption not only by attackers, but also by MITRE. MITRE, who made the documents that you see in this screen, they adopted the usage of cloud services, and you can see it that they also have we take this from here. We take this screenshot from the MITRE attack, which is some sort of a taxonomy by this nonprofit cybersecurity corporation that lays out the different tactics and techniques that are used in an attack lifetime. And we see that they added web services as both a command and control technique and an exfiltration technique. If you go to the website of MITRE attack and you go into the pages of these techniques, you'll see dozens of different reports of different attack campaigns. Some of them are large scale that used these techniques. Now back to the attacker. So the attacker wants to make a CNC, and they know that they want a channel for telemetry, a channel to send commands to the malware. They want to exfiltrate, and they want to support multiple victims. And now we're going to play a little game. We're going to think as if we were the attacker, and we are trying to check now if Google Drive is a good candidate for being a command and control server. So if we want an infected device, let's assume that the device, of course, is already infected. We assume that it's there and that it communicates via API with Google Drive. And now we want to think of ways how the device could send telemetries to Google Drive. Well, this is relatively easy. We could have the device upload a document to Google Drive with all the telemetry information, right? So we can check this box. Now let's think of how the infected device would fetch commands from Google Drive. Well, if the attacker leaves some sort of information on that cloud service, and the malware infected device knows how to read it, then it can execute it. So here we go with names of folders. So we can, when I'm thinking in the attacker way now. So the attacker can set a folder with a specific name, which includes the command for execution, and then the infected device would fetch it and execute it, and then send the telemetry as said as an uploaded document. Of course, this doesn't really have to be reading a folder name. It can also be, if it's a long script, then it can be another document that's uploaded by the attacker, as long as it's well-defined and there's a good, let's say, protocol for this kind of communication. Next, if we want the malware to exfiltrate, let's say, files to Google Drive, well, this is obvious. It can just upload the files to Google Drive. That's what Google Drive's for. It's a cloud storage system. And if we want the attacker to be able to communicate with multiple devices, they can, for example, have one separate folder for each of the infected devices and control them separately. Or maybe also have one root folder where all infected devices would fetch commands from if they want to send a command for all the devices together. So we're good. We can see that Google Drive is a perfect candidate for being a command and control server. Let's take it with another cloud service, Trello. For those of you who are not familiar with it, Trello is a task management system where there's you can manage your tasks by having lists. These lists have cards, and you can set the cards as checked or unchecked, move them from list to list, and so on. We are going to see it very soon. So how would malware send telemetries to Trello? It can write information on a card. So we got it. How malware would collect commands to execute from Trello? It can read from an existing card. So we got that too. That existing card is the card that the attacker creates with the command for execution. How the malware would exfiltrate to Trello? Well, this is a little bit less trivial than the Google Drive case because Trello is not a cloud storage service, but still you can add attachments to cards so that if we want to exfiltrate a certain file from the malware to Trello, we can ask it to upload it as an attachment to an existing card. So we get that too. And to handle multiple victims, we can have the attacker have a separate list, one for each of the victims. I think I'm going to pause now before we go into the demos of both of these cases, in case there are any questions. Liran, is there anything?
Okay, no questions yet. So we're all good. Good demo.
Perfect. So demo time. I'm going to demonstrate now what I've just shown, explained. So it's going to be two cases. One of them is in Google Drive and the other in Trello. Trello first, where I'm going to install malware on a victim, which in this case is my own computer, but we can assume that it's any computer in the world. In this case, I wrote it on Python because it's just proof of concept, but it can be compiled or anything. And then I'm going to control that malware and eventually exfiltrate data from it by just operating it from the command and control side, which is purely cloud service. I want to, I like to treat it as command and control servers that even my mother can operate, and she's not a cybersecurity researcher. So let's start. Oh, first, before that, your time to get excited is when you see files exfiltrated to the command and controls. Okay, so get ready for this. So this is my command and control server that it's on Trello. This is Trello. This is a browser, right? And you see here that I already have one victim on which I have installed malware, and I can send commands to. And now I'm going to install it on another victim. Okay, I'm installing it. Let's say that it's a remote victim that somehow got to execute this piece of code, and we're not going to spend too much time on how this happens. There are different ways, but you can think about it as, let's say, someone who runs some executable that they shouldn't run. Okay, so once we run it, we see welcome to Trello malware. That's nice. And here, from the attacker's side, you see that there pops a new list, and this tells the attacker that a new device got infected in case that they tried in masses in a spray and pray technique to send the same malicious executable to many different users. So here we see that the host name that got infected is victim's MacBook Pro. And now the attacker can send commands to it, and sending commands is as easy as adding Trello cards. So the first part, the prefix, is it was set by the attacker when they wrote the code of the malware, so that they know what to send it, and there's a certain protocol between the infected the malware code, and so that it runs or executes whatever starts with exec /. And what's next is plain bash. So every bash command will send its results back to the card. So now I'm going to start with a simple directory listing, ls. What the malware does is communicate every couple of seconds. You see that it's changed to done, to communicate every couple of seconds with its card and see if there's any new commands for execution. And if it finds any new command, it will execute it, upload it back to the same card, and then mark it as done. And here we see that under the root folder, we have 3 different folders: Elon Musk's tweet collection, Finding Nemo in 3 Easy Steps, and Hollywood Medical. And now I'm an attacker that likes stealing medical information. So I'm going to run a full directory listing on Hollywood Medical. Fine. This brings a recursive directory listing. So let's see what we have there. We're waiting for the malware to fetch the command, and there it is. Now we see that there's x-rays of many different persons. Let's collect the x-ray. Oops, sorry. Let's collect the x-ray of Vincent Adultman. So now I'm going to run a different command, exfil, which goes for exfiltrate, and we're going to exfiltrate this file, which we've just found when we listed the directories. Wait for the malware to fetch it and send the result. Get ready to, and then there we have it. We have Vincent Adultman's X-ray, and now we reveal the truth that Vincent Adultman is nothing but 3 kids stacked on top of each other in a trench coat. That's great. Success. Let's do it now on Google Drive. I'm going to pause the malware and the Trello malware and run Google Drive malware. And again, we assume that this happened in a certain way. Once the Google Drive malware is installed, we see that there's a new folder here. And this is a sign for the attacker that they can start sending commands to a new infected device. In this case, the commands go as folder names. So we're going to execute a directory listing again, even though we could execute any bash command that we want. We're waiting for the malware to fetch it and execute it. This is a stressful moment, and it's over. It's done. And here we see that there's a document that includes the directory listing. So we have SpaceX Starship and a layoff roadmap in Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. And we're going to see what's in SpaceX Starship. So I'm going to execute a command that runs a full directory listing on SpaceX Starship, see what's here, wait for it to execute. Okay. And we see a full directory listing that there's a super secret document here explaining how not to explode. Sounds interesting. Let's exfiltrate it. So I'm going to exfiltrate this file. We're waiting for a while, and there it goes. It's done, and the file was exfiltrated by the malware straight to the folder where the command was. And here we see the very secret document that says that it's yet to be defined. Yeah. Okay. So what we've done here in the demos was basically to turn this kind of command and control server that was very easy to get down to an attack operation that's purely based on the clouds. And there were 2 examples here, Trello and Google Drive, but you may imagine that it's not too hard to implement on many other cloud services, as long as they have an API that the malware can communicate with, which is true for most of the cloud apps. Sometimes it costs a lot, but normally it doesn't. And as long as it's possible to send to have the malware read and write information and upload files, that's it. That's all you need. So we could have done this with any other cloud app. Now, let's estimate how good this solution is from the attacker's perspective, of course. Let's start with the good. So our purpose of having this hard to block list was met, right? There are almost no organizations that would block access to Google domains. So this is great for the attacker. Also, many security services would skip the TLS inspection for what's called trusted services or known services. They would give them a free pass. So that this means that even in security mechanisms that have that implement TLS inspection, it's very likely that the cloud services would be allow listed, and this means that there would be less inspection into what happens in the communication with these cloud services. So this is another good thing for the attackers. It requires zero maintenance as opposed to the traditional ones where the attacker has to set up a server, make sure that it's always up, maybe purchase a domain for it, open ports, control the firewall. Here, there's nothing. It's not owned by the attacker. The cost is zero unless you go for Twitter, X. And now the bad things. So first, the hacker credentials are exposed in the example that I've shown. What happens there is that the malware communicates with the CNC. For the malware to communicate with the CNC, you need the malware to know how to access that CNC. Now, that CNC is owned by the attacker, of course. So that if someone ever puts their hands on the malware, reverse engineers them, and they may find the credentials of the attacker, which may reveal not only what the endpoint side, but also the entire operation of the attacker. So that the attacker needs to be careful here. Obviously, there's ways around it, but at least the naive implementation that we had here has this problem. Also, there's a risk of getting banned by the cloud service. I'll tell you a story. I had this presentation in a different conference a while ago, and I ran a dry run, an almost final one, and then I wrote a command that I wanted in the demo that I wanted to be executed by the Trello malware, and it didn't execute. And I waited and I waited, and it didn't execute. And the first thing that I feared was that maybe I got banned by Trello because I was using their API too much. It turns out eventually that it was a Trello issue. Trello was down for a couple of moments, so that I didn't get banned, but it still may happen. Also, if the cloud API changes its if the cloud service changes its API, that's a bit of an issue because the malware assumes a certain way to communicate with the command and control server, and this is a problem. This problem wouldn't happen if the server were owned completely by the attacker, as in the traditional implementation. Obviously, there's also ways around this, such as having the malware communicate with a primary and a secondary cloud service. Yeah, it can be worked around, but still the naive implementation has this issue. And also, this is not much of an issue, but if we take traditional command and control servers, then the malware can communicate with them in many different ways. It can be HTTP, it can be via DNS tunneling, FTP, you name it, or even designated protocols. When we're talking about cloud-based command and control servers, we are confined to what the cloud service offers. So this is the entire, let's say, range of functionality that we have is confined by what the cloud service offers. This is not much of a problem because I think that most of what attackers want to do can be achieved in this way, but it's still worth mentioning. Now, let's get out of the attacker's point of view and back to a defender's point of view. We know that it's a problem now. We understand it. We know that it's overlooked, and we want to understand how to mitigate it. The first thing that I think is most important is that, and I'm going to talk about protection from an organizational point of view as opposed to a personal or an endpoint point of view. But organizations need to change their mindset when it comes to protecting against communication with command and control servers. The traditional forms of thinking about blocking domains and blocking IPs or maybe ports are not necessarily valid when it comes to cloud service-based command and control servers. Now, what they have to think about instead of IPs and domains and ports is probably cloud apps, tenants, and maybe also actions or content of the actions that are being made. And once this is incorporated into understanding and taking the cloud service communication also as part of the attack surface, I think that we can start a great change in the way of blocking this sort of attacks. One form of doing it is by splitting apps into sanctioned and unsanctioned apps, and maybe restricting the who or what is possible to do in unsanctioned apps. And I'll give an example. We know, and it's been reported a lot in the recently, that mega.io, which is a file storage service, cloud service, basically open to everyone, is very popular among attackers. As far as I know, it's not very popular among organizations. So maybe it's worth either blocking those unsanctioned apps altogether, or at least restricting the upload ability to them. The same goes with Pastebin, for example. We see when we look at traffic and data that we collect that Pastebin is almost always. Pastebin, by the way, is kind of a paste cloud platform where anyone can paste text or scripts, and then they have a short URL that can be easily downloaded. And this is something that's also popular among attackers. They just upload scripts to Pastebin, and then they have the malware collect it and execute it. I think that I've never seen legitimate usage of Pastebin. Might be a bold statement, but still I'm trying to make a point that if you're not sure about a certain cloud service being useful for your organization, then you may consider unsanctioning it or maybe having any policies that restrict it. Granular cloud activity control means that, well, I kind of mentioned it before, but this is a good practice regardless of the described threat here. And it means that we want to restrict specific activities for certain cloud services or certain endpoints. So, for example, we could do something like we don't. It's okay to access Google Drive, but maybe we want to restrict the users that are able to upload to Google Drive, or we want to restrict the users that are able to upload to Google Drive files that are larger than a certain size. This is what we mean when we say granular cloud activity control, and there are different vendors that offer such functionality. DLP, which stands for Data Leak Prevention, means that it's also possible to inspect, not only look at the action itself, but also inspect the content of that file, for example, that is being uploaded from the organization to a cloud service. And then there are different mechanisms that can find strings that are potentially suspicious or sensitive that they don't want, and either block them or monitor them. We have to say that DLP in this case is just a naive solution, because attackers can easily encrypt the data before exfiltrating it, and then they can exfiltrate it and evade DLP. But still, it's a good practice to have, for an organization, to have visibility not only of what happens or with which applications you communicate and how, but also if any of the content includes this kind of sensitive information. Also, and I think that this is a very powerful mitigation practice, is tenant restriction. In both of my examples, and actually in any setup of cloud-based command and control servers, we need to have the command and control server. It's not a server that's owned by the attacker, but the cloud service account belongs to the attacker, and we have the malware communicate with it. It's always the attacker's account. It's very hardly can be an organizational account. So if, for example, we have an organization, it might be a good practice to make sure that Google Drive uploads, or maybe even communication with Google Drive altogether, is only restricted to accounts of the organization's tenant. This is usually whatever's after the @ or there are different ways to implement it. The most common way is actually requires the cloud service itself to cooperate, and it's based on injecting a header when the request leaves the organization and goes to the cloud service. So, for example, any request that goes to Google Drive will have an extra HTTP header that says allowed tenant, Cato Networks. And then Google Drive implement the enforcement. So if they see that the tenant that's trying to communicate with them is not in Cato Networks, they will block the communication. So here we need some collaboration from the cloud service side. There are also different implementations that may not require it, but this is a very powerful mitigation practice. And also there's a heuristic approach. When this piece of malware that I had that might be still running, so I'm going to close it. It communicates and it keeps on communicating every couple of seconds with the command and control server. If we have any way of monitoring how often command or how often HTTP requests are sent to that server, and we would see that there's too many of them. It doesn't make sense, and they are probably in infrequent times. So it's easy to see that if we have, it's not easy, but if we have any anomaly detection mechanism, we can see that this kind of communication with Trello or with Google Drive or any other cloud service is weird. And I think that this is it for now. Not for now. Until next time. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, no, that was a very cool presentation, Avishai. Thank you for joining. I have to say, at the beginning, when you were going through all of the CNC stuff, I was with the Google Drive example. I was like, like it's like you said on the good parts. It's very hard to mitigate because people use the Google Cloud's like storage stuff, like the G Suite or whatever. So it's hard to like find those kind of cases. So totally agree. This is pretty cool way of doing CNC stuff. We did get one question. Let me bring it up. It's this one. So Abdul Malik asked, I think, if we have like a small organization that uses workspaces, how do we know legitimate actions? So I guess that's really related to that Google Drive stuff and the way to find or mitigate that. Do you have any ideas on this?
Okay. So I think this was someone answered in the last slide. To tell what legitimate actions you can look at either the tenant that is being accessed, but it really depends on what kind of visibility you have, right? Sometimes some mitigation practices can be done on the cloud service itself because they allow some admin access where you restrict who does what. Sometimes you need an additional security solution. I talked about the tenant restriction, which I think that I'm pretty sure that in Google, if you inject an extra header, I don't really remember which one it is, but if you inject it by using a proxy, a forward proxy for the traffic leaving the organization, you add that header. You say, I only want to allow a certain tenant, so you can make sure that no other tenants are being accessed, which is already good because as said, the command and control cloud command and control server is also always the attacker's account. So apart from this, legitimate actions, we also talked about the heuristic approach. So this is also a way to spot illegitimate actions as long as you have enough visibility to these actions that are communicating. And also there's like different vendors who make CASB and DLP that can help with it.
It's cool. Avishai, I think this is all we're going to take in for the questions now, but I wanted to ask if there's like more interest that people would like to hear and learn more about your research at Cato Networks. Do you have a blog or something where Cato publishes those things?
Yeah, so we have the Cato blog, and I'm on social media. You can look me up either by my name or by at Zavishh, Zavishh. Yeah, that's it. I see that there's another question here. I'm not sure we have the time for it, but
we can take it. Let me look in. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so how do you prevent access to attacks?
How do you prevent access to attacks from command and control in Google Drive, S3 bucket, Trello, or any public services which you can't block in your organization? I guess that's the point where this is actually a very good way to create a CNC because it's hard to just block them easily.
Yes, and as said, like I think the same answer to the previous question still applies here. It's by either looking at the account you communicate with, the actions that are being made. For this, you'll need TLS inspection, or you're controlling it from the cloud service side. And the same, it was again, it goes back to the last slide.
Yeah, I agree. So I think we'll conclude this. I will urge everyone and recommend them to find Avishai on social media. Go to any Cato Network's blogs and publications, just like learn more about what they do. And it sounds like they have some really cool research and ideas for how to mitigate this. So that's all the time we had today. Please, if you have more questions, drop them on the Discord chat on our Discord community for DevSecOn. If you don't know where that is, you can go to devsecon.com and find the link to the Discord community. Huge thank you to Avishai. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual session today. It was awesome having you. Thank you for just spending the time and helping educate everyone else here. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for listening. For just joining us, everyone in the back. In the meantime, I just want to ask you, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to share it. It will be, as we said before, recorded on the YouTube channel as well as on the website. We have been DevSecOn, an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. Thank you so much. Thank you, Avishai. I'll see you around, I guess, in the area. And have a great day.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.